Ann Hanson was born in 1957 in the suburban community of Neapville, situated near Chicago. Known for its tranquil streets and friendly atmosphere, Neapville was an area where families thrived and crime was rarely discussed. Julie grew up in a large, close-knit family, surrounded by loving parents, an older sister named Jill, and a younger brother. She had a distinctive passion for singing and regularly participated in her school's band and choir, enriching the musical spirit of her environment. Each weekend, she attended Sunday school at her local church, reinforcing the importance of faith and community in her life. On July 7, 1972, at the age of 15, Julie planned to watch her younger brother play baseball. She borrowed his bicycle and set off towards the stadium, which was only a few miles away from their home. Her parents were away at the time, leaving Jill, who was then 18, in charge of her siblings. Despite her responsibility, Jill did not immediately realize Julie's absence that night, perhaps assuming she had stayed out with friends or was in her own room. Low crime rates and the peaceful character of Neapville contributed to this lack of worry and delayed reaction. By July 8th, Jill became concerned and began searching for Julie, contacting friends for information but finding no one had seen her. Jill then reached out to the police, prompting a search. Volunteers joined the effort, retracing Julie's likely route to the stadium. Soon, her bicycle was found abandoned on the roadside. Tragically, Julie was discovered in a nearby cornfield less than a mile from home. She had suffered 36 separate injuries, a devastating attack that would haunt the community for decades. Following the discovery of Ann Hanson's body in a nearby cornfield, the investigation began with urgency and determination. Medical examiners conducted a thorough examination and confirmed that Julie had suffered multiple serious injuries. The evidence pointed to a brutal and violent attack. Alongside their findings, examiners collected biological traces believed to have been left by the perpetrator on Julie's clothing. During the early 1970s, however, forensic technology was severely limited. DNA analysis, which would become a crucial tool decades later, was not available. As a result, while the biological evidence was carefully preserved and sent for storage, it could not yield immediate answers. Investigators were left with few technical resources, pushing them to rely on traditional police work and intuition. In an attempt to outmaneuver the attacker, detectives made a strategic choice to withhold sensitive details about the nature of Julie's injuries from the public. Their goal was to trap the guilty party. Sometimes offenders would inadvertently reveal knowledge only the perpetrator could possess, whether under interrogation or in conversation. This approach had proven effective in some investigations and offered one of the few avenues to glean insights from potential suspects. Police canvassed the surrounding neighborhood, searching for eyewitnesses and reviewing the records of anyone in the area with previous criminal activity. Despite scrutinizing known offenders and interviewing numerous residents, no credible witnesses emerged. The investigation quickly ran into roadblocks, as the absence of solid physical evidence and direct eyewitness testimony severely hampered progress. Detectives found themselves navigating a landscape of uncertainty. Each false lead underscored the difficulties they faced in an era before advanced forensic science, leaving law enforcement in a prolonged state of frustration and uncertainty as the case remained unsolved. 20 years after Ann Hanson's murder in Neapville, investigators faced renewed hope and chilling reminders. In 1992, police arrested Major Morris for the assault and murder of Roberta Anderson, which took place in Otsego, only 11 miles from Neapville. Roberta's case echoed Julie's in several profound ways. The victim endured multiple serious injuries, and forensic experts were able to recover biological evidence from the crime scene. Morris, who lived near Roberta and worked locally as a garbage collector, had immediately attracted attention during the original investigation. However, suspicion deepened considerably after Morris moved away abruptly just days after the crime, raising further questions about his involvement. Over time, advancements in DNA technology allowed investigators to definitively revisit old cases. When they compared Morris's DNA to evidence from Roberta's case, they discovered a match, confirming his guilt in Anderson's murder. Morris confessed not only to Roberta's killing but also to the 1978 murder of an 18-year-old girl in Glen Ellen. These crimes shared striking similarities in their violent nature, number of injuries inflicted, and the geographical proximity to the original Neapville crime, creating an undeniable pattern. Recognizing these correlations, detectives remained vigilant about the possibility that Morris could be connected to Julie's murder. They closely scrutinized physical evidence and patterns for any link that could tie him to the case. However, the DNA sample found on Julie's clothing ultimately excluded him as the perpetrator. The breakthrough for other cases provided closure elsewhere, but for Julie Ann Hanson's family and investigators, the search for answers continued. Morris's exclusion forced authorities to broaden the scope once again, considering new suspects and keeping the investigation open, determined to resolve a decades-old tragedy. With Major Morris definitively excluded as a suspect through DNA evidence, investigators were compelled to assess the possibility that other serial offenders operating in the region during the 1970s and 1980s could be responsible for Julie Ann Hanson's murder. The focus initially turned to Henry Lee Lucas, a well-known figure within law enforcement circles for his string of confessions to numerous violent crimes across the United States. Lucas claimed involvement in Julie's murder, but detectives noted his long-standing pattern of falsely confessing to crimes he did not commit. Historically, Lucas had testified to participating in over 100 killings, yet conclusive evidence only linked him to a handful. Investigators thoroughly assessed his statements regarding Julie's case, but quickly determined that there was no supporting physical evidence. His admissions lacked specific details that could have only been known by the perpetrator, and after a brief investigation, authorities eliminated Lucas as a credible suspect. The investigation then shifted toward Bruce Lindell, another serial offender who was active in the Chicago suburbs during the same era. Lindell's criminal profile drew investigators' attention because the nature of his attacks bore striking similarities to Julie's case. He was known for inflicting multiple severe injuries and targeting young individuals. However, Lindell's own fate put limits on the case's progress. He died in 1981, reportedly after a botched assault led to his own injury and death. Decades later, in 2020, authorities utilized modern DNA technology to analyze Lindell's possible connection to Julie's case. Once more, the results conclusively ruled him out as the source of the DNA sample recovered from Julie's clothing. Each examination of these suspects, initially full of hope, ultimately collapsed under the weight of conflicting evidence or unresolvable dead ends. The investigation again stalled, underscoring both the limits of the forensic science of the time and the difficulties posed by cases that spanned decades without resolution. The pattern of following up credible leads only to reach an impasse became a recurring frustration for all involved in seeking justice for Julie Ann Hanson. After decades of persistent investigation and a series of dead ends, the case of Julie Ann Hanson's murder saw a significant breakthrough in June 2021, propelled by advances in genetic genealogy technology. Neapville police sent the preserved DNA sample taken from Julia's clothing in 1972 to a specialized lab that had the ability to compare genetic material across vast public databases. The sample, incredibly minute and degraded after nearly 5 decades in storage, presented substantial challenges to forensic scientists, requiring precise and innovative methods for analysis. Nevertheless, the lab's team worked meticulously to ensure every viable genetic marker could be identified and cross-referenced. Investigators then faced the daunting task of sifting through thousands of potential genetic profiles provided by the lab. Modern genetic genealogy utilizes not only law enforcement registries, but also open public ancestry databases, which individuals voluntarily contribute to in hopes of discovering lost relatives or tracing family histories. The breakthrough arrived when a match surfaced, not directly to the perpetrator, but to a relative who had uploaded their DNA to a public platform. By following these connections, police eventually uncovered the identity of Barry Lee Welpley, a 76-year-old welder living in a distant state. Whelpley, who resided only a mile from Julie's home in 1972, had not appeared on investigators' radar throughout the investigation and all subsequent decades. On the strength of the DNA match, Neapville police arrested and charged Barry Lee Whelpley with Julie's murder. The case not only demonstrated the critical capabilities of contemporary forensic technology in solving crimes long considered unsolvable, but also underscored the dedication required as police meticulously navigated thousands of profiles and overcame significant biological hurdles to achieve justice for Ann Hanson. Following the arrest of Barry Lee Whelpley in connection to Ann Hanson's 1972 murder, a series of legal and procedural steps took place that continued to shape the trajectory of the case. Upon taking Whelpley into custody, investigators carried out a thorough search of his residence. Police collected a substantial array of potential evidence, including sketches, tapes, and various photographs, all of which would require meticulous examination as part of the legal process. As the investigation advanced into the judicial system, procedural complications began to arise. Notably, when police arrested Whelpley, they inadvertently recorded a private conversation between him and his wife using their body cameras. This recording was subsequently deemed inadmissible in court after a judge ruled that including the footage would violate legal standards for privacy and due process. The exclusion of this evidence marked an early setback and added complexity to the proceedings. Defense counsel responded by citing additional procedural violations, arguing that some of law enforcement's actions during both the arrest and subsequent searches may have breached established protocols. This led to additional reviews and motions within the court system, further impeding the speed at which the case could advance. As a result of these factors, including evidence exclusion, procedural reviews, and legal debates, the trial has been repeatedly postponed, and nearly 2 years after Whelpley's arrest, proceedings have yet to fully commence. The delays are attributable to the accumulated impact of these various procedural hurdles, as all parties work within the established boundaries of the justice system. Ann Hanson's family and the Neapville community experienced deep and lasting effects from the tragic crime and the length of time it remained unsolved. Julie's parents, who had endured decades of uncertainty and sorrow, passed away before the recent breakthrough. Her father in 2009 and her mother in 2019, never learning the identity of the person responsible for her death. The family's grief was compounded by the years spent hoping for justice and closure that seemed unattainable. In contrast, at the press conference announcing the arrest, Julie's surviving siblings expressed their appreciation to the detectives and law enforcement officials who persisted in their search for answers, publicly thanking them for never abandoning the investigation. Barry Lee Whelpley's arrest sent shockwaves through his own family and social circles. He had no criminal record and was widely regarded as a loving, respectable individual by those who knew him. Friends and relatives struggled to reconcile the allegations with the image they held of him, expressing disbelief and confusion over the possibility that he could have carried a dark secret for nearly half a century. The revelation challenged the community's sense of safety, highlighting how tragedy and hidden crimes can shape perceptions of trust and normalcy. In the aftermath, authorities began reviewing other unsolved cases from the region, aiming to identify similar patterns and determine whether there were additional crimes linked to Whelpley. The case underscored the importance of persistence in law enforcement and served as a reminder that the search for truth and justice can span generations, affecting families and communities beyond the original crime.